Hello, fellow griever. This is the Leftover Pieces Suicide Loss Conversations podcast, and I am Melissa, your host. This week, you have found yourself with me for one of my shorter, solo, down the rabbit hole episodes. Here, I take you with me on a journey of sorts, through thoughts in my own griefy mind. Some days, I may tackle topics as if I am in Alice's shoes, slaying the Jabberwocky. And on others, I may end up in my own pool of tears. Or I may just go a bit sideways and paint the proverbial roses red. But I always promise an adventure. So let's dive down the rabbit hole and see just what sorts of madness we might discover together. I am glad you have joined me, because while I do know how lonely this grief is, I also believe we needn't be alone. Welcome. Hello, fellow griever, and welcome. Yes, we are down the rabbit hole today for Season 4, Episode 39. I'm Melissa, your podcast host, and as the title suggests, today we're going to talk about this old adage of practice makes perfect. I don't believe it, and I know you probably don't either. But for the sake of this podcast and talking about life after suicide loss, I want to speak a little bit about the word practice, because just like the word tools, it's thrown around a lot. And when we hear the word practice, we can think of it as a noun, or we can think of it as a verb. So are we talking about practicing something until we get better or proficient at it? Or are we talking about a practice, like practicing meditation, practicing yoga? So I would say that I'm talking about both, because they are used, both of them are used by me on a regular basis. And for me to say practice as a noun, so as something that we do or rehearse over and over again, that's akin to using the word to what we do with our tools, right? So we use tools or practices in order to help us learn to live alongside of this grief more successfully. But we also have to practice using those tools. So it's almost like I'm saying we have to practice our practices, which is accurate. We do have to practice our practices. But it's really, really important that we don't just take something and, it's like that we don't just throw spaghetti at the wall and hope for the best and think that the more spaghetti we throw at the wall, the better. Because that's not necessarily true. Because for the most part, if the spaghetti is not done correctly, it's going to fall off the wall, or worse yet, it'll smash into the wall if it's overdone, and you won't hardly be able to peel it off. It takes the perfectly done piece of spaghetti to stick to the wall, but yet still be firm enough to peel off and eat. So I know that sounds like a strange analogy, but what we do with our practice time in perfecting the practices that we're trying to use, the tools that we're learning to use to assimilate into our new self, our new life, if you will, after suicide loss, what we do with that time is super important. It's kind of like I say, time doesn't heal all wounds. Makes me cringe to even hear that said. And I know it probably does you too, because this wound, this loss, this traumatic grief after suicide loss isn't going to go away, right? Time isn't going to make this disappear. We are not going to just get over it. We need to learn to live alongside of this. We need to learn that joy and happiness can exist next to each other. And as long as we love our person, we are going to grieve. So it's one of those types of sayings. And I ran across a quote the other day when I was looking at talking about this by the great Michael Jordan. And he said, you can practice shooting 8 hours a day, But if your technique is wrong, then all you do is become very good at shooting the wrong way. Get the fundamentals down, and the level of everything else you do will rise. It spoke to me in such a big way because this can absolutely apply to our practices after the loss of our loved one by suicide. And I'm going to give you some examples. So some of the practices, aka tools, that we talk about often are, we're not going to go, there's tools in multiple different categories. And I would put things like counseling and therapy and even some of the modalities that we use on our subconscious, like EMDR and EFT and NLP, and all the initials. I get it. There's lots of initials, but so even those types of tools exist in a space alongside some of the practices that we talk about all the time, like yoga, meditation, breath work, energy work. Tapping falls into that category. Oracle decks or tarot, if you do that. Crystal energy work. Some of this is our fun hobbies, practices that we need to do to find quiet time and space. Like, I encourage people to always have a creative endeavor of some sort. And it's amazing to me how many grievers will try things now that they hadn't tried before, that then become a practice because they find the therapeutic value in it. And this is things like artwork or art of any kind, whether it be art or, physical art or art in the form of music or theater, hobbies, anything fits in that category, obviously, that we like to spend our time on. Even things like cooking, very therapeutic. Things like writing, very therapeutic. All practices, right? So there's that word practices. But we can't just pick up something one time and be proficient at it. So we have to practice that tool. We have to practice that practice, if you will. And I will argue that some things we can become proficient in and feel like we don't have to practice as often. But even the greats, even whether it's musicians, artists, fill in the blank, they don't practice until they become a star, and then they quit practicing. There's always room for improvement, even when we feel we've achieved a level of proficiency that we might be happy with. I can always tell you that there's two ways to practice something at that point. You either practice to maintain proficiency or you practice to improve it. And only you know what a tool that you're using or a practice requires you to continue improvement and to maintain it at that level, or whether you're going to need to put in more practice because you're trying to up level or go up another level, as Michael Jordan stated, right? If you get the fundamentals down, and the level of everything else is going to go up as you continue to practice. But let's go back to the idea of fundamentals for a minute. So one of the things I tell people with practices after the loss of someone by suicide and after learning to, heal our trauma or grieve successfully, again, those are two separate things, but whichever one you're working on, one of the worst things you can do is attempt to eat the entire dinosaur in one bite, or elephant, as some people say. You have to slow down sometimes and take stock at the things you're trying to do and realize that as a very early griever, you have limited capacity to take on all the tools and activities and practices at once. The thing I recommend people do a lot of times is just find one new thing and try it for several days or even a week. If it resonates, then you begin practicing. Then you begin applying this in a regimented way into your life so that that can help you heal and help you learn to live alongside of this. If it doesn't resonate, you set it down and you pick up something else and then you work on that for a little while. And so some people, especially a lot of us that are desperate to just somehow feel better or more normal. And I pause as I say that because that's what we're somehow looking for. We know we can't fix it, but we're looking at a way to be able to live with this more successfully, less painfully. And time does take away some of that sharpness, but it's what we do with that time. It's what I always say, what we do with that time that really matters. But as quickly as we'd like to make this all happen, we don't undo a lifetime of other habits and practices in one day, not even in a week or a month. We have to be willing to realize that this traumatic event cracked us open on the level that it did. And for those of you listening, I realize that could be different levels for all of you. But for those of us that even feel completely at one end of the spectrum, where I feel like my entire world cracked open and I didn't recognize myself, my life, my family without Alex there, it's taken a great deal of work to reframe the thinking and the words in my mind, and to find practices that support where I want to be in my life. So some of that is we have to, be able to dial into those things for sure. But then I also don't want to forget to acknowledge that we get tired. We get exhausted, actually, of trying new things that we aren't used to, trying to figure out what our new routines are going to look like. And sometimes we have to take a break from practicing and give ourselves time to renew a little bit and rest. That's the part that I talk about when I talk about grace and space, you guys. We have to do that for ourselves regularly. That almost needs to become a practice in itself, right? So if we define my famous words that I say so often, grace and space, grace is courteous goodwill. And space is obviously an interval of time. So when I tell you to give yourself grace and space, I'm saying give yourself the best goodwill you could give somebody else, the benefit of the doubt, the softness of no judgment, the safe space to exist. That's the grace piece. Space, giving yourself whatever interval of time you need. Sometimes we need 5 minutes. We just need to give ourselves a few minutes to regroup. And other times, we need a full-on vacation or a weekend away, or we need a week not to do anything that is something that's new that we have to think about. We need to rest and sleep more and rest our soul and our heart and our mind. And that's part of this. I think the mistake that a lot of people make is that they think the grace and space part is something you do that is in between the tools and practices. And it's not. It's the thread that binds them together. It's part of what makes them successful. If we go back to Michael Jordan for a minute and talk about professional athletes do not practice 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, 52 weeks a year. They don't. They have time to rest. There's times that after they've had very rigorous practices, they take a day or two completely off. And that's for physical recuperation, but it's also for mental recuperation. So we have to think of our grieving journey and building these new practices and learning skills and working on our grief muscles and our survival muscles. If you will, let's go to work. The first year we're working on those survival muscles, if you will. Then we start working on hope muscles, finding hope and getting stronger in our belief that hope exists. And then we implement healing tools and our healing muscles have to kick in, and we have to figure out, what does this look like? What does she mean when she says I have to heal my trauma? What does it mean to learn to live alongside of our grief successfully? So it takes time, and that is one of the most frustrating and exhausting parts of this, is that just like, unfortunately, we're not going to wake up tomorrow and find that we have our old life back. We are also not going to wake up tomorrow proficient at living in the new life that is our reality. It takes a lot of practice. And so I want to talk about one last piece of this, one last practice, if you will, that I have not addressed, because I know I didn't go into depth on all the practices. I have other episodes and lots of tools available on my website and links to places that you can get all those therapies and all of that. So I didn't go into all of them, but I want to go into the other one just a little bit that I'm going to name, which is the practice of gratitude. And I'm sure that many of you probably took a collective sigh. It feels a little sharp to say that because it's really hard to find things to be grateful for sometimes in the midst of immense pain. And we often believe that it's not possible to be purely grateful for things on the same level that we used to be. But, I will say that the number one thing that probably most of us are grateful for when we're talking about the loss is the person that we lost, that we're grateful for the fact that they lived and were in our life. And yes, they were in our life and lived for too short, 100%. But I have found with myself that having a good attitude of gratitude, at the risk of sounding like I'm putting something, trite out there, I'm absolutely not. Having gratitude as a daily practice helps keep me centered and actually helps me be more successful in my other practices that then help me live more successfully and be happier. I will absolutely tell you that when I find myself thinking about how grateful I am that I was ever blessed with such an amazing child. I have 3 amazing children, but only one of them that isn't here anymore. So that's what I'm talking about. The gratitude I have for that is unparalleled, and I would do it all over again, even if it was going to end the same way, because I'm so grateful for having had Alex in my life in the 21 years of memories and the permanent imprint of him on my soul and my heart. But I also take that gratitude to a place of remembering that while this is hard and painful, that there is a world full of people, unfortunately, that understand this pain, that also live in the place of this pain and are surviving it as well. They have found hope, and they are also looking at finding their healing, that it's happening on a greater level than what I'm experiencing, and it happens on a lesser level. But it happens. It's a human condition for loss and pain to occur in our life. And so for me personally, part of being grateful is remembering that, yes, it could be worse. That actually helps me sometimes the most. And sometimes what helps me the most, depending on the day, is just standing in gratitude of the things I have. And it can be really small things, like being grateful I live in the country that I do, with a roof over my head and all the access to things that we have here, to the things like being grateful for my family, to, bigger things that we're grateful for. But in having that practice of gratitude absolutely helps keep me out of the place that would be more one of self-pity and unbearable sadness. And if we're realistic, a lot of what we're doing through this survival, hope, and healing is taking ourselves from barely surviving, from the sadness, if you will, being unbearable, to a place of being bearable, and then from there to a place where you can actually thrive. Does that mean we make ourselves thrivable? I'm kidding. I just had to. So in wrapping things up today, I want to let you know that today's episode was meant to be one that's a little bit more prophetic, if you will. I know I didn't give any 100% concrete, we didn't break down the tools. Like I said, I've done that in other episodes and will continue to do that. But today was more one that was meant to be thought-provoking, to ask you, if you are not currently working on the tools and the resources and the practices, to think about the difference that could make for you in not only how you're functioning, but whether you're growing and learning to work towards thriving more, not just surviving. And if you are already in the process of those, sometimes it's good to reassess what's working and what isn't working. Are we trying to make something fit that just doesn't? I'm giving you permission to try something else, to thoroughly put in that toolbox the things that work for you, and to take out or pass on to someone else, just like you would an actual tool, and say, this one doesn't work for me. We don't have to try to make everything work for us that might work for somebody else. So I wanted to empower you to think about those things. I want to give you time to pause and consider where you're finding your resources and tools. I want to encourage you to practice your practices, to get to a level of proficiency and comfort that it becomes habitual and becomes part of your routine of wellness in grief. I want to remind you to instill some form of practice where gratitude is involved. And I want you to make sure you've instilled the practice of grace and space into your grief routines in your daily life. And it feels like I would be remiss if I didn't finish this episode by reminding you that there are a lot of tools available to you on my website, theleftoverpieces.com. Many of the ones I'm speaking of can be found at the time of this release of this podcast. There's actually some new ones available to you. So if you haven't been to my website in a while, I want you to go to the support tab. I want you to click the healing tools for you. And I want you to see the start of some exciting things that will be increasing over the next couple of weeks. But right now, I have added 3 comprehensive, that might be an unfair word, 3 appropriately comprehensive beginner crystal guides, and one that is intended to be for a little bit more advanced or familiar with the energy and crystal world. But there's a total of, I think, 48 crystals included in the 3 guides. There's chakra stuff. There's meditation mantras in there. I've packed as much as I can into them to still make them be not overwhelming and helpful. I'm really proud of them, and I think that they will be a great step for a lot of people to add to something that they do. Many, many people have messaged and asked me about energy and crystal healing and have wanted more information on it when I put it out in emails. So that's what those are in response to. And in the very, very near future, the next week or two, check back, because I will be adding essential oil therapy sheets to download, ones that can be diffused as well as mixed recipes to mix and put in your own roller balls to wear. I will also be adding a series of downloadable meditations. Specifically, I will start with one that will help with going to sleep, or at least relaxing more deeply, because I realize how much sleep can evade us in the beginning. So to be able to guarantee you, I'm going to be able to send you to sleep, at least get more relaxed, right? So the hope is to get closer to sleep. One for anxiety or stress-inducing situations and just days that feel more stressful, and one that is more specific to grieving practices and connection with our loved one. That's where those 3 are going to start. I may add meditations regularly, but I will start with those 3. So there'll be those items all available on that Healing Tools for You, centering you page that I have created. So I'm going to end here for today, and I will finish up by adding a brand new spot that I have created to let people know about the Legacy Project, and that will be right here as I finish up. And in the meantime, please reach out if you need anything, and I hope that we talk soon. Bye-bye. Are you a mom like me who has lost a child by suicide, and you want to ensure that who they are and the amazing life they lived are remembered, I have found that after child loss, creating a legacy is a critical piece of our healing journey. Let me tell you about the Because They Lived Mom's Legacy Compilation Group Writing Project. I have developed this project where you can create a true lasting legacy for your child while you also experience deep personal healing alongside other moms doing the same thing. This powerful project encompasses support and creativity, as well as elements of both narrative therapy and grief companioning. At the end of just 13 weeks, the chapter you write will be published in a very special compilation book so that their memories and stories will live on. I promise you will receive all of the guidance, support, and help that you need, so you do not need to be a writer in order to author your child's story. Go to www.theleftoverpieces.com and click the Get Support tab to find out more, and then maybe take a look at the volumes that are already published. Then remember to click the button and schedule a call with me today. So we'll conclude here for today, but I just wanted to say a few things before you go. If you're new to the podcast and have not listened to the very first episode called Intro Episodes Start Here, all the way back at the beginning of Season 1, I would encourage you to do so that you know what to expect from the Leftover Pieces, because I do have several different styles of episodes that I record, and we do release weekly, almost all of the time. So I hope that you will come back often to join us in this community of suicide loss survivors. If you have not already, also, I would encourage you to check out theleftoverpieces.com, where you can find and have access to all of the things that I currently offer. Some of those things are online Zoom support groups, links to my books, educational opportunities that I'm adding all the time, as well as different downloadables and resources for all suicide loss survivors. And if you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the podcast, or you'd just like to connect with me for any other reason, you can do it through the website as well. So until next time, I just want to remind you that I know how lonely this grief is, but you don't have to be alone. Talk soon.